going to talk about third declension adjectives this week, but I want to do a little bit of review about first and second declension adjectives. Now, as you know, they have the same endings as first and second declension nouns. The only things that are a little bit odd is sometimes there's a pain word, so the endings don't match. We call these 212 adjectives. You'll hear that sometimes. I just want you to be familiar with the term because as they're listed in a glossary, the three listings that they have, the first one is always the second declension masculine ending, the next one is the first declension feminine ending, and finally we have a second declension neuter ending, and hence 212. Okay, so as you might suspect, third declension adjectives use third declension endings, but they use third declension I stem endings, not the regular third declension noun endings. So because the nominative forms vary so much, remember in your third declension noun chart, the nominative singular box is always blank because almost every word has a different ending, right? There's nothing, they vary so much. So third declension adjectives are broken up into three subgroups, and those are based on the number of terminations or endings of the nominative forms. Now, take a big breath. This might seem overwhelming. I'm going to break it down for you. We'll practice it a lot. It's not as confusing as you might think. The whole three termination thing sounds really daunting, but it's actually not. So the only thing that differs between these adjectives, these third declension adjectives, is their nominative singular. And that's why they're called 3, 2, or 1 termination adjectives. And that just means, termination just means ending. And all that means is if they're three termination adjectives, they have three different nominative endings based on their gender. Two termination adjectives means that there's only two different nominative singular possible endings, and one termination means that all three genders have the same nominative singular form. Okay, so three termination adjectives. So three termination adjectives, it has three different terminations or endings for the nominative singular. And the masculine and feminine forms are exactly the same except for the nominative singular, right? The only difference is except for the nominative singular. So this is how you'd see a three termination adjective in a glossary. So if I said colere, coleris, colere, all that means is you'd see that in the glossary. Colere is the masculine. These are all nominative singulars, all. So they're feminine is coleris, and the neuter nominative singular form is colere. So to find a stem of an adjective, you go to the feminine, second one listed, you go to the feminine, which is coleris. And then what do? You take off that ending, and there you go. You've got the stem, all right? So all genders have the same endings in the genitive, dative, and ablative cases. So if you pull out your adjective charts in your book, third declension, three termination singular, you can fill these out, and here is the plural. So you notice that all of these seriously are the same, right? Everything's the same. The only thing that different is the masculine, feminine, and neuter forms have three different endings. Okay? All right, of course, neutered nominative accusative the same, which is why the accusative is blank. But other than that, everything else is very similar to the nouns, except if you notice with nouns, we normally see this ablative. We normally see the ablative as an E, but it has an I stem ending, so it's an I. Okay, so go ahead and fill that out, pause and fill that out in the back of your book. And then I'm going to show you what it was like if we are going to decline colere, coleris, colere. So as you can see, these three forms are the same forms that it would be in the glossary. We've got masculine, feminine, and neuter. Now for everything else, we use the stem. The stem is colere. Do you see it every single time? It's in blue here for you. And then we just add the endings for the adjective, which are the same as nouns, except they're I stem endings, right? Neuter, we use them as I stem endings. So that's pretty easy. And then, of course, for the three termination plural nominatives, we don't use those forms. Everything here is clair, even the nominative plural, right? And then we add the I stem endings, which is why in class, the last thing we've learned is I stems. We had to know the I stem endings before we could learn adjectives. All right, let's talk about two termination adjectives. Now, the only difference between three termination, and two termination adjectives is that the nominative masculine and feminine singular forms have the exact same endings, and neuter has a different ending. And you'll see in a dictionary, only two forms are listed. Okay, so the first one would be masculine, feminine. They're the same. So if you see, there's no dividing line right here. They share the same. And then the second one is the neuter form. Okay, two listed. So what I want you to do is now you can look at the two termination charts. You really only need the three termination chart, but this helps you remember that exactly the same. So all we've done is merge the masculine and feminine, and everything else is the same. Everything else that listed in here, all these endings are the exact same thing as the three termination, and exact same thing as the neuter I stem. So you're actually not learning any new endings. This is only that you have to know that for adjectives, instead of noun endings like 2-1-2 adjectives, you have to use the I stem noun endings instead of the regular. Okay. Last one termination, third declension adjectives. Now, the only difference between two termination and one termination adjectives is that the nominative masculine, feminine, neuter, singular forms have the exact same endings. So two forms are listed in the dictionary. So even though it's a one termination adjective, two forms are listed. The first is in the nominative singular for masculine, feminine, neuter. The second is the genitive singular form, and you'll see that it ends in is. And the reason they list it is so that you can determine, it tells you, you can figure out what the stem is. Because remember, normally you go to the feminine ending nominative singular to find the stem. Well, it's normal now. It's all the same as all the rest of them. So you need to figure out the genitive. All right, so in a dictionary, look and see Ingengentes. So the first one that would be listed is masculine, feminine, and neuter. And the second one, and this is nominative singular, right? The second one that you'd find listed would be the genitive singular, and then that helps you find the stem. Because remember, the stem is ingent, which looks very different than the nominative singular ingens. There's a T in there. So here's a trick. In looking in a dictionary, a third declension adjective entry looks similar to a third declension noun entry. So these one's an adjective and one's a noun. So the adjective, I can tell you already, is clemens, clementis. This is the adjective, even if you didn't look at the English meaning. And Ingengentes is the noun. Then the reason is the noun entry will have a gender with it. An adjective, no gender. So that is a really important thing to know the difference when you're looking in. Adjectives will not have a gender listed, but nouns will. Okay, because otherwise they look exactly the same and you don't know which is which. All right, so fill out your one termination adjective charts with the ending. You know, it's the only thing that's different is that there's no dividers between these two. Everything else in the entire chart is the same. Okay, so that's pretty easy. Nothing else changes. So remember, again, it's already endings that you know. It's the third declension I stem noun endings. If it helps you write it down in this one termination chart, do so because it'll remind you. Okay. When you're done, all the charts on the adjective page that you just filled in your chart book should look exactly the same. All right, so we're going to take a look at a list of adjectives here, and we're going to determine if they're first or second or third declension adjectives. And if they're third declension, then we have to decide if they are a 3, 2, or 1 termination adjective. So the first one, acer, acris, acre, it is a third declension adjective. And look, there's 3 listed, so that's easy, though it's 3 termination. Aptus first and second are easy to recognize because they have an us, on them. You might see an R in the first one, but the rest, feminine always ends in A, and neuter always ends in So this one has to be a first and second declension. Okay, brevis breve. So we know there's only 2 listed, so it has to be a third. How you know that it's 2 termination is that this one doesn't end in IS. If it was a 1 termination, it would end in IS. All right, so it's third and it is 2 termination. Calere, caleris, calere. 3 listed, it's not us, so it has to be third, and because it's got 3 listed, it has to be 3 termination. Fortis, forte. All right, it has to be a third because it doesn't end in us, so that's easy to see, and it also doesn't end in is, the second one, so it's not the genitive form, so it is a 2 termination. All right, ingengentes, again, it has to be third, no us, but look at this. This second one ends in is, which tells us it's the genitive form, so it is a 1 termination. So this one, we have iuenis, iuenis. Again, has to be a third because it doesn't end in us, This second ending is is, so it is a 1 termination. Here's tricky. You know a noun that's iuenis, iuenis. The only difference is that we know this is not being used. So you actually do have to decide if it is a noun or an adjective, which should be easy to do by the context of the sentence, unless you see IU when E, and then you know it's an adjective because it has an I stem ending, and adjectives use the I stem endings, okay? So you have to decide if it's behaving like a noun or an adjective. All right, next one, omnis, omne. Again, it's not us, so it has to be third. Second one doesn't end in is, so it is a 2 termination. Publicus aum, there we go. We see our us aum, so we know it is a first and second declension adjective. Next one, senex, senes, so third declension because it has only 2 listed. We see an is here, so that tells us it has to be a 1 termination. And gravis, grave, 2 are listed, so it has to be a third because there's no us, and the second one ends in E, so we know it needs to be a 2 termination. And again, this is the masculine feminine, and this is the neuter. For the 1 terminations, like senex, sene, we know that this is the genitive singular form, and this is masculine, feminine, and neuter. All the rest, how you form adjectives, they have to match. Even if they're a third declension, they have to match the nouns they modify in gender, case, and number. Everything else you know about adjectives applies here to third declension adjectives.